While it was her dad, Hugh Hefner, who made male-oriented adult entertainment mainstream, it was his daughter and her female-dominated management team who stabilized the company, refinanced the company, and took a U.S. print publication and nightclub company and turned it successfully into a television and internet and international licensing company. So I first met Christie years ago. I was pitching her to lease to me the Chicago mansion of Playboy because I had this unusual interactive and participatory play called Tamara that I wanted to put on. And what I found was that she was open-minded and warm and level-headed and sensible and, in other words, not at all what you might expect from Hugh Hefner's daughter. She's a highly successful businesswoman whose product just happens to be the male fantasy image of pert and available naked women with spectacular superstructure. She's also deeply involved in a variety of socially important organizations and causes, and is married to that other interesting senator from Illinois who we heard from yesterday. Chrissy, would you come up?
He did a bunny. So if I were really talented, I would do the entire presentation sort of, against the screen. But I don't have that talent, so I'll just put the rabbit here and have it watch over me. Thank you for the kind invitation and introduction. It's my pleasure to be here. I had the opportunity, I guess about 7 years ago, to present at the TED conference, Technology, Entertainment, and Design, which some of you may be familiar with. So I had a little bit of a sense of what this might be like, but it's just been marvelous, and my husband and I are very much looking forward to participating and observing and engaging in the next several days. I thought I would talk first a little bit about women in business for the obvious reasons, but then also share some observations about gender and social sexual attitudes and changes, because I think they're both obviously related to Playboy, and I can draw on my own experiences. When I first took over the company, and Moses was gracious in giving me credit for turning it around, there were not very many women executives, certainly not women CEOs of New York Stock Exchange traded companies. And we've clearly come, a long way since then. If you look around and pick up the papers or watch television, there are a lot of organizations, business and other, run by women. But it isn't as if we've reached parity. In the US, for example, of the Fortune 500 largest companies, on the boards of directors, only 15% are women. And in fact, one of the things I got involved in was forming a group called the Directors Council, which is a search firm whose purpose was to, in effect, take advantage of the fact that because of changes in American law, boards of public companies now have to have a majority of independent directors. So we saw that as a chance to place more women and people of color on public boards and have been working on that. And as some of you may know, in Europe, several countries have actually mandated significant, i.e. 40% of board positions needing to be held by women. And when that was first done 5 years ago, you can imagine the outcry and the reaction of that being, either impossible or a really shitty idea. And then, of course, 5 years later, it turned out to be eminently possible and actually a really good idea. But I think part of what's happening, at least in the US, is that some women are making choices about what they want professionally. And one way that's expressing itself is that a lot of women have become entrepreneurial successes. that they've made a decision that they can have more control over their lives, not in the largest corporations, but in businesses that they themselves start and run. And in fact, today, for example, more people work in women-owned businesses than work for the Fortune 500. So it's actually a fairly interesting sort of engine of the economy. And I sit on the advisory board of something called Springboard Enterprises, which has raised billions of venture capital money for women entrepreneurs, and also helped start a group called the Committee of 200, which has a chapter in Canada too, which is made up of mostly women entrepreneurs. And it's very interesting for me to see, because I come not from the entrepreneurial side, but from the corporate side, to see the dynamism in that part of the economy. But clearly, the goal would not be to sort of only have one channel of business success available to women. And so, as Moses alluded to, for example, in the company I run, over 40% of our executives are women. So it's obviously possible, and kind of the question is, well, how do you achieve that? Well, I think one factor is that you kind of become the victim of your own success, in the sense that once you get to a critical mass, and there's been quite a lot of research that shows that sort of if there's one of any type, whether that's a woman or someone whose first language isn't English, or someone who's openly gay, or someone who is African American, if there's sort of one of a group, it's hard for the dynamic to actually embrace diversity. But once you add a second, a third, et cetera, you get to a place where better decisions are made, because you're getting the exchange of different points of view and different ideas. And so, kind of by extension, when I go to interview for key jobs, talented women look at the management team and they say, hey, I'm not going to be the only woman sitting around the table when a big decision is made, and I like that. But I think there are other factors as well, and some of that has to do with actually sort of indirectly the whole issue of family, which is this idea of whether you can have balance in your life between work and family. And companies that do that better, I think, do better in attracting talented women. Although I have found in the research that we've done that actually that is becoming more of a generational perspective. You know, it used to be that women were concerned about balance, but younger men are concerned about it too, because younger men are much more active fathers. And so sort of the old school thinking that you could kind of force your people to relocate every few years to get ahead, or, you know, work, you know, sort of as if there was no life outside of work, is actually there's pushback on that from not just younger women, but younger men. And there was an interesting piece recently in the Harvard Business Review by Sylvia Ann Hewlett, who was particularly looking at what, surprisingly to me, has been a decline in the percentage of women in IT, which is, I think, troublesome, because so much of our future, and indeed much of the theme of this conference, is related around the opportunity of technology and science to make our lives and our planet a better place. So she did this work to try and look at why that was happening, and also actually prescribe some things that could change. And one of the things that she found was this 24/7 culture that seems to be particularly pervasive in information technology related jobs. That's sort of, well, of course you should work, 75 hours a week. But she actually found something else that was kind of interesting, back to Susan's presentation about gender differences. And it came out in a focus group where people were talking about how they had achieved promotions in their field. And a senior engineer told this story of getting a 2 a.m. phone call about a system in Russia that had crashed, and 3 hours later being at the airport at 5 a.m. with his whole team, and 3 flights later getting over there and working round the clock and fixing it. And the women who were in the focus group not only didn't seem to think that this was an appealing model, but actually immediately reacted by saying, well, who the hell let a system crash like that? Don't you think you could have prevented it? I mean, what is this sort of macho, let's go in and fix it? So the author started to call this behavior dive and catch, as in sort of swooping down and getting the fish and coming back out. And her point was that maybe if that's the model for success, it may not be equally attractive. Now, having said that, I have to confess that my own observations in networks of women in business and among my friends and in my own company is one that I think the differences among women, and this would be true among men as well, as leaders, is every bit as profound as the differences between the generalizations of male and female behavior. And my own personal perspective and philosophy of that is that people who are effective leaders, never mind great leaders, invariably are people who actually can draw upon the traditionally male and the traditional female characteristics depending on the circumstances. Because if we think about our lives, regardless of whether you're in business and regardless of whether you manage people, the way you interact with different people in your family, let's say, or different people who are friends, or different people in charitable activities you're involved with, is not all the same, because what you have learned, whether you're conscious of it or not, is that different people respond to different styles, or to different styles at different times. And if you can't affect a wider range of style and skill, which means basically being able to listen and adjust, then I think it's very hard to be an effective manager. So yes, you have to be tough, but yes, you also have to be nurturing. And yes, you can't manage by consensus, but you'll make better decisions if you can engage people in the process. So I'll close with a thought that's sort of not a scientific thought, but actually to go back to something John Nesbitt said 30 years ago. You know, there's the high-tech side of life and the high-touch side of life, and in the more high-tech the world is we live in, the more we value the high-touch side. So I would say, as a small example of that, in a world where email is ubiquitous, the handwritten thank you note has more meaning. So in the sense of the subject I was talking about today, I'm more sanguine about the future of sexual freedom for women and for men, and more worried about the seeming diminution of sensuality and the importance of holding on to that. The difference between Ella Fitzgerald and Courtney Love. The difference between driving in an SUV with the air conditioning on and driving on the back roads in a convertible. Because I think at the end of the day, the truth is that our lives are not measured by the years we live, but the years are measured by the life in them. Thank you.